Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and as always with me is Ken. How are you, Ken?
I am exceptionally well, Rory. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You have caught us at episode 125. And today's episode, we're going to be splitting it into 3 topics. That's our format here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And the first topic we're going to be kicking off with is the difference between counselling and other helping activities. And there's that recognition, that going into a counselling course, you're not necessarily wanting to become a practicing counsellor. You may be wanting to use the skills and the knowledge you learn vocationally. So we're going to be diving into that. And then Rory, we've got check-in with CPCAB, and I know that this is going to chime a little bell for a lot of people listening to this. The question that you were kind of discussing with Kelly Budd, I believe, is a level 4 qualification in counselling and psychotherapy enough for someone to go into private practice? Can you kind of give us a taster of what we can expect from check-in with CPCAB?
Yes, well, it's an apt interview because we get lots of inquiries on our Facebook page. And if you don't know where to go to our Facebook page, if you just go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, and you'll find our page. And if you click onto it, it's a closed group. We let you in, and there's thousands and thousands of students of counselling and psychotherapy. There are tutors, there are supervisors, all with one aim to talk about the wonderful world of counselling. And this question comes up so many times. Is level 4 here in England? I've got to be very careful here, Ken.
Oh, yes.
Our Scottish listeners have pointed out that there's different levels in Scotland. So I think it's level 8 is the equivalent to level 4 in the UK. Is it a qualification that can go in for private practice? CPCAB have an interesting view on it, and you'll have to hear me and Kelly discuss it. But she comes up with some quite interesting points, so it really isn't one to be missed. It's going to answer, I think, a lot of questions.
Looking forward to checking with CPCAB. And keeping with that topic, we're ending episode 125, also speaking about what you might need to consider when going into private practice. And this is a good fit for a student that is maybe thinking of one day going into private practice, or a qualified counsellor who wants to go in private practice or may even be in private practice. Check if you've looked over these considerations. And again, as Rory rightly said, the questions come from our Facebook page, and you start the conversations. We ask the questions, we put it to people like CPCAB, and we bring the answers for you. So kicking us off today, Rory, speaking about that difference between counselling and other helping activities, and I'm mindful this is kind of a question that you might be asked on an assignment or in an exam if you're doing a level 2, that introduction to counselling. But I think it's an important question to consider no matter where you are in your journey, that difference between being a counsellor therapeutically or using counselling skills. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's really interesting. As someone who taught for over a decade, one of the things I know that a lot of students who come to counselling courses work in some kind of social care setting. They could be nurses, they could be working in probation, they could be working in the police. I've trained paramedics, I've trained doctors, I've trained all sorts of people.
Yeah, social services. It goes on, doesn't it? Yeah,
goes on, and of course they're coming from a place of fixing. If you break your leg and the paramedic turns up, then you want them to do something. You don't want to sit there with your broken leg and the paramedic saying. So it really feels like your leg's broken and it feels like you're in a lot of pain at the moment. You're saying, bring me the painkiller. And I think what's really interesting about that is it can be a kind of an eye opener for people who come from that environment, and we thank people who are in that environment for their service, to realise that actually counselling isn't about fixing, repairing, doing to the client. It's about listening. It's about allowing the client to make their own decisions. It's a whole different thing. And for some people, it can be a very uncomfortable transition from not being the person who goes out and fixes to the person who just sits and allows the client to speak about what's going on for them and for them to make their own choices. And it is, every course has a module of, at some level, the difference between counselling and other helping activities. And I've produced a nice handout kind of giving an overview of that and a quote, which might be useful for somebody's assignment. There's always a quote asked for. So we got a quote there from I think it's Pete Sanders.
That's one of Rory's super duper handouts, and you can get that free of charge, and they're great to reference if you're doing assignments or if you just want to kind of bone up on the old theory there. And you can get that from going to counsellingtutor.com. That's our website, counsellingtutor.com, and just click on the podcasts tab, go to episode 125. That's today's episode. All of the show notes are there, links to additional information to kind of back up what we've been speaking about, and you can download Rory's super duper handout free of charge from within that page. If you are already a member of our paid for resources, our library, we sometimes call it the Counselling Study Resource, well, that has already been added to the Counselling Study Resource for you, so you can just kind of log in and grab that. But I'm also mindful, Rory, that not everybody that enters and goes and does a counselling course has an end goal of becoming a counsellor. I have a personal friend at the moment that is on a level 3 certification in counselling, and he is a chaplain, and he's decided to do this training to kind of underpin the work that he's doing in the hospitals. He's working in the hospitals. He's being confronted a lot with people in deep sorrow, people in grief, people about to face loss, about to face end of life. And he has gone not to become a counsellor, not to deliver therapy, but to better understand, to better listen, to better be able to communicate. And I guess there are many that are called into counselling for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think that you've highlighted a very important point there, in that one of the things about knowing the difference between counselling and other helping activities is to make sure that if you're using counselling skills as part of another helping activity, that you don't start to counsel. I think that's really important because, if you're, say, for instance, you're a doctor and someone comes in and they're unwell or they have a difficult diagnosis, what you don't want to do is to open some kind of therapeutic process, because therapy is done through a number of sessions. It's done by a trained professional person. It's contracted. It's implicit. In other words, the client knows they're coming for therapy. And there is an ethical issue if someone starts to do some counselling without any kind of contract or an implicit understanding. That's what's happening. So, part of understanding the difference between counselling and other helping activities is to know your limits when you're using skills.
100%. And generally, kind of looking at those difference between being a counsellor using counselling skills in another role is that as a counsellor, the person coming to see the counsellor will be coming for a very specific reason. They will know why they are coming. They will know that they are entering into therapy. But the example I used just a few moments ago of maybe a chaplain working within a hospital setting, speaking to somebody that is going through difficulty, maybe with a loved one who may be very, very ill, they are not aware necessarily that they're entering into any kind of relationship at all. They may just feel that they're having a chat. So you're 100% correct there, Rory, that we wouldn't want to delve therapeutically into their material. We would want to maybe just use basic listening skills so that that person feels that they're being heard and they're being understood for where they're at. But we would need to keep that pretty shallow. And another reason for that, you've touched on a few differences. One of the boundaries. I mean, counselling, when you train and you go into a counselling relationship, it is a boundaried relationship, and the boundaries are set out beforehand, as you explained, Rory, by means of a contract. That contract explains exactly what is on offer and what is not on offer. It explains confidentiality, where confidentiality might need to be broken, and none of that is present within just a chat of somebody that may be presenting with an issue or a problem, maybe to a teacher, to a priest, to a youth worker, to a nurse. And therein lie the differences. Another difference that kind of shines for me is that a counsellor will work to an ethical framework. There's an ethical framework that they will kind of have signed up to be able to practice, to get their membership to be able to practice, whereas somebody maybe just using counselling skills may not even be aware of what's in an ethical framework. And the ethical framework is there at the end of the day to protect the client and to protect the counsellor. So I guess there's some stark differences, but I put this out that if you're listening to this and you're going along your counselling course, it doesn't matter whether your end goal is I want to be a counsellor or I want to just use these skills in my vocation. I think, Rory, as you once said, a counselling qualification at any level is CV Gold. Tell us a bit more about the CV Gold, Rory.
Well, I think in the modern world, employers are looking for people who have excellent communication skills. And, a counselling qualification shows that not only have you got excellent communication skills, but you've got excellent listening skills. And anybody who runs a business understands that miscommunication, that not understanding their customers or their clients is a real way of alienating the people that they're servicing. So, by seeing that on the CV, a certificate or a diploma in counselling, even an introduction level 2 to counselling skills, it shows that somebody has taken the time to think about how they communicate, how they listen, how they experience others, and also have indulged a little bit, if that's the word, or got involved in their own personal development. So they really are good qualifications. A lot of people say, well, they're a bit soft. Actually, if you think of the modern world, communication's at the heart of it, and having a counselling skills qualification is, as I say, CV Gold.
Love it. Absolutely great topic there. And don't forget about Rory's super duper handout. The title of the handout is What is Counselling? It gives you a nice overview that you can refer to. You're going to get that from our website, counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, episode 125. Go and download it. If you're a member of our paid for resources, just log in. It is there for you. You can do a search for it within your CSR dashboard. So kind of, I guess, moving away from that question of what's the difference between counselling and counselling skills, taking the line that, yes, we're going to now be looking at qualified therapists coming to the end of their studies. They've done their placement. Can they go into private practice? Is it advisable with a level 4 qualification to go into private practice? And Rory, you touched base with Kelly Budd from CPCAB on this very topic.
Yes, I spoke with Kelly, and she comes up with some very interesting points about what level 4 qualifications qualify people for and what they don't. And I think it's the don't that is the interesting bit. So I think it's a not to be missed part of it. You make your own mind up on that, because as it stands here in England, level 4 is qualified. You can join, get full membership of an ethical body, and in the absence of regulation, you can go out and set yourself up in private practice. However, as we'll see in the interview, there are things that need to be thought about. And sometimes doing a course to equip you to work in private practice may be a wise thing to do.
Like it. So let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
And we welcome Kelly Budd. How are you doing, Kelly?
I'm really well, Rory. Thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. And we're going to be talking today about an interesting subject, a perennial subject that gets asked time and time again. What level is qualified in the UK? And there seems to be forever a confusion about this. So I guess for those listening in the UK, level 4, or I think it's level 8 in Scotland, which is equivalent to a diploma. I best be careful of our Scottish listeners and be respectful to them. So. As it stands, in England, you can get a level 4 qualification. You can sign up to an ethical body as a full member, gain your insurance, and technically, in a non-regulated environment, you are a qualified counsellor.
Yeah, that it tends to be one of the questions that comes up so often that we thought it might be useful to kind of explore it a little bit. And I think the idea of when can you call yourself a counsellor in our country at the moment, anybody can call themselves a counsellor. But in terms of those in the know, when do we really consider somebody to be qualified in that profession and to be able to begin to practice? And for us in our system particularly, our level 4 diploma is designed to provide somebody with the ability to practice as a counsellor, primarily in an agency, but to kind of go on in terms of kind of being able to work in an agency and independent practice in the future. So essentially it's considered to be that's the gateway.
Yeah. It's the entry level, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
And in our profession, we never stop learning. And some people say, well, why do I need a level 5 qualification? And I think it's a good question. And I'm sure you're going to outline some of the things that you come across in private practice when you're on your own that you don't come across when you're in an agency.
Yeah, and I think the difference between, speaking from CPCAB's point of view, the difference between our level 4 and our level 5, the level 4 content itself is, even looking at the kind of criteria, it's really designed around working in an agency. It's pitched as if you have a framework of support, a line manager, a supervisor, peers, other kind of counsellors working there. Because when you're taking your kind of first steps into client work, you want to be focused on that, your kind of therapeutic relationship, really kind of developing your competency. You don't want to be worried at that point around how to run a business at the same time. So in our minds, kind of being able to do kind of 2 years under your belt of practitioner training and kind of really achieving that level of competency, that's what the level 4 is for. And when people finish in that, they're likely to be able to be working in an agency competently really quite well. Our purpose statement also says with additional experience, that person could become an independent practitioner working in private practice. And it's not for us to say when somebody is personally, professionally ready to work in private practice. But one of the things that we are aware of is that if somebody wants to work at greater depth with a client or have kind of more underpinning theoretical knowledge around how to work independently, our level 5 is designed to be that add-on to support somebody in a learning sense of how to get there.
So what would someone learn on the level 5 that they might not learn on the level 4 course?
It's particularly focused on things like applying a coherent assessment framework to your client work. So in independent practice, you're likely going to have to assess a client's needs yourself, whereas in an agency, often that's a supervisor, a line manager, a senior kind of counsellor that does that and make sure that that client is appropriate for that counsellor. Whereas in independent practice, it's you alone. So you're going to be able to manage your own workload, particularly to draw up and establish your own contracting with clients, to really kind of self-evaluate your own work. So there really is this kind of shift towards independence, I guess, is the kind of difference between the level 4 and the level 5.
Yes, and I think what's sometimes not, kind of conveyed enough is that you get handpicked clients at an agency. Somebody more senior than you will be looking at the presenting issues, how they're presenting, and they will be passing on people who students can work with at the level of training and experience they have.
Yeah.
When you're a private practitioner, like myself, it's whoever phones you up. And they could have a myriad of difficulties and issues, which, unless you've got a lot of experience, you may not be able to deal with or understand, or even you may just do the wrong thing inadvertently.
Yeah, and you in independent practice, you don't always have other counsellors around you. You can't walk back to your office and be sat on the desk next to 3 other peers that you can gain that support from. And we believe when people are starting out, that's so valuable. And I guess even I find myself saying it when you're starting out. I hear people kind of sometimes dismiss agency work like it's the thing you have to do before you can move on to kind of being a proper counsellor. And I really don't see agency work as lesser than private practice. It's just different. I worked in agency settings for 16 years. I did the majority of the kind of learning I did as a counsellor, I did in my agencies. So for me, it's not a case of you do this until you can move on to private practice. Some people do. Some people work in agencies in a paid role. I worked full-time in an agency for 16 years and do that for the entirety of their counselling career, and there is nothing wrong with that.
No, and I absolutely agree with you that it's absolutely gold to work with a good agency because you make your contacts, you get to speak to more experienced practitioners who may be working with more complex clients. You get to work with the wider mental health community, so you get a holistic approach to mental health. And in fact, I only started in private practice 3 years ago. And I worked in agencies in pro bono or free work, or latterly in paid work since 2004, and I found it really useful. I really did.
Yeah, and most people come to this profession because they genuinely want to make a difference, and agencies are usually the settings where people who might not have the opportunity to access a private counsellor, that is where they're going to be going for counselling, because it might be that their lifestyle or their finances prohibit them from going to private practice. So you get to work with people who truly are in great need, in real distress. It's such valuable work. So what my message to people out there is, don't rush from agency work into private practice necessarily, because often you do the most valuable work in terms of kind of social inclusion there.
Absolutely, and as my auntie said, the oil of the wheels of society is volunteering. It literally oils the wheels of society. But there are some fab paid roles in agencies, and I've known quite a lot of my students who've worked in an agency, and then they were approached and said, we're looking for a paid work. And they've worked in paid work, and then they've done that for a little while, and then they've branched out on in their own profession. They've gone out on their own. But a level 5 qualification gives you what kind of things you think are essential for a private practitioner that may be covered in the level 5 curriculum?
I think it's working with other people who are at that level of their understanding. They're either choosing or they have chosen their kind of theoretical approach. So they're really learning how to embed that into their way of being, really kind of creating a kind of consistent, coherent way of working with clients, and using that kind of network of that learning group to become an experienced practitioner. And even at that level, discussions come up in the kind of level 5 groups, even around things like how to complete a tax return, which you're not going to get that on your level 4. How do you get your insurances? How do you set up your own counselling room? So it may not be in the kind of explicit curriculum, but at that level, most people are looking at working in private practice. So you really start to consider what it means to run your own business as a counsellor. And that doesn't necessarily come as part of the training. Normally we don't train people in how to time manage, how to do their finances, but private practice, you've got to think about those things.
And it's one thing, and I don't want to put anybody off setting up in private practice, but it's one thing saying, I'm just going to get myself a room and the clients will come charging through the door and I can charge them, but it's actually, the reality is that you're going to have to think about little things like, do you have a specific phone for your clients, and is that phone switched on when it's on? Tax returns, making sure that the premises you use has the right insurance, having your own insurance. There's huge amounts of things. And if people are paying privately, they expect a level of service that's commensurate with the fee that's being asked for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even, like you say, down to things like setting up your own policies, making sure that you, as a practitioner, comply with legislation around things like data protection. In an agency, somebody kind of does that for you.
Yes.
Well, not entirely. It doesn't absolve you of all responsibility, but as an independent practitioner, you need to set all of that stuff up for yourself.
Yeah, things like an IT audit, making sure that your IT is secure, making sure that your phone's secure. I mean, I'm the data protection officer for our organisation, and I have to say that some days it is a full-time job writing the policies.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm being registered with the ICO if you're in the UK.
Yeah, and so much of that is done at a management level when you work for a company, when you are your own company. Essentially, I kind of think for students, it's being aware that it's not beyond your reach, but you're going to need to be able to be therapeutically present and in a relationship with your client, whilst also managing the other stuff, but keeping that out of the room so that you don't become stressed when the client doesn't show up because that's your £50 that you're not getting that day.
Yes. So I think that's just so valuable, Kelly. And as we wind this up, I think there's so much to think about there. You know, as we alluded to earlier, the level 4 is a gateway qualification, but there's certainly a lot of other skills to consider when working privately for yourself. And maybe you get that in a level 5 qualification, and certainly you get it through experience. So, Kelly, as always, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Rory.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
Well, I mean, that's food for thought, if ever there was food for thought, Ken. And it is a big jump from working in an agency, you know, where, you know, you've got real big support systems around you, and you're, you know, at a student level, you're given clients, hopefully, that are consummate with your level of experience and skill, to going out into the big wide world, getting yourself a web page and a Facebook page, and asking the world to phone you up to be a qualified counsellor. So I think there's a lot of discussion around that, but I think Kelly made some valid and salient points there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And if you want to get in on this conversation, then do so on our Facebook group. And you can find that by going to Facebook, putting in Counselling Tutor. Come and join the conversation. And the topics for Check-In with CPCAB, they are taken from our Facebook group by the CPCAB team. They're always scanning to look what your questions are. So please get those conversations going. Ask the questions that you want to ask, and we will get those questions answered for you. But sticking with private practice, the last section for today's podcast, 125, is our episode, and we're covering some considerations, Rory, for private practice.
Yes, I think there's a lot of people who set up in private practice, and, you know, they get their qualification. They paid a lot of money for it. It's not counselling training isn't cheap. And you think, now I can stop living on beans on toast. That was my experience of training, and go out into the world and make my money. But there are things that you need to consider when you set up in private practice. And I would say that one of those things is having a real conversation with yourself about, you know, are you comfortable going out into the world and seeing the general public? Is your knowledge of mental health legislation enough? Have you worked with complex clients, people who may have a number of difficulties? That's just one aspect of it, you know, because in agencies, usually you're given clients at the level that you're training at. And I remember when I trained, I stayed on in my agency for a good couple of years after I qualified. And it was noticeable when I qualified, I got more complex clients. I was allocated more difficult clients. And that allowed me to cut my teeth working with more complex behaviors, more complex presentations, more risky presentations, people who may have declared they may take their own lives or self-harm or harm others. So I think that there's something to be said about, you know, understanding that. What is your level of understanding about how to kind of gauge and assess if someone may take their own life? And then there's a plethora of other things: tax, paperwork, general data protection regulations. There's huge amounts of other things you've got to think about. You know, if you're self-employed, you've got to register for tax, you've got to find rooming. You really have to have a bit of a business mindset. You know, can you realistically survive and pay the bills being a counsellor setting up in a brand new business. And I think that's something to take into consideration, Kev.
Definitely, and you're 100% right, Rory. You could have all of the training in place. You can feel that you've got the qualifications, you've done all the relevant CPD, that you have adequate support structure around you with supervision and peers in order to act when you kind of get an emergency or something comes up from a client. Where I guess in an agency you're protected because you've got those levels and you've got those policies and procedures in place. Going into private practice, you've got to put those policies and procedures in place yourself, and you need to think of things. And so often things come up and we haven't thought about them, and we deal with them in the here and now, whereas within the agencies they kind of have maybe years of practice to see what has happened over multiple clients to put those policies and procedures in. But even when you feel comfortable in doing that, you hit the nail on the head, Rory. There is the business side of things. Now, by no means are myself or Rory discouraging anybody from going into private practice. It can be incredibly rewarding for yourself, for your clients. It can be rewarding financially as well. But there are considerations, and that's our topic here. And the business considerations for me are a biggie. And the reason for this is we are not trained. Our society, at least here in the United Kingdom, does not train an individual to run a business. If you look at our schooling system, very little time is spent on how to set up and manage a business. In counselling training, very little time is given to setting up and running a private practice or starting a business. And running a business is so different to working within somebody else's business. And even if that's a non-for-profit, it's an agency that is delivering services, working within that agency, you have the structure and everything that you would expect in a business surrounding you. When you're going in yourself, there is so much to consider. And there is the feeling of, I've got the qualifications. If I build it, they will come. And sadly, that is not true. And many colleagues that I've spoken to have gone ahead and they've thought, okay, all I need is a website. A website's going to get people coming through. I'll put my listing on a few of the directories, and then found, Rory, sadly, they were back to your beans on toast scenario, where it was beans on toast because the clients were not coming through. Because you need to generate what are called leads. A lead is somebody that might be interested in your service. That's the first part. Where are those leads going to come from? Enough of them to be able to manage and pay your expenses. Like you said, Rory, you have tax, rooming considerations, all of that, your own supervision. There are costs to consider. I just do want to share that we put together a little mini course just talking about these business considerations, and it's called the Private Practice Blueprint. And if you're interested in looking over that, it is in our paid for resources section, which is called Counselling Study Resource. It's a little course there that walks you through all the different considerations from a business point of view, right through from building a website, what you should say on your website, pamphlets, what you write in your pamphlets, right through to accepting payments online or with card readers and different ways of accepting payments. And I built that course based on my own experience of going into private practice, the struggles and barriers that I faced, and the solutions that I found to overcome those challenges. So that is available if you are a member of our Counselling Study Resource. And if you're wondering what is Counselling Study Resource, more info on that at the end of the program. We will definitely be covering that.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. There's so much more. And of course, assessment using Core 10 or Core 34 assessment to help clients see any progress they're being made or any areas that need to be looked at. And also assessments in general. One of my qualifications is in client assessment, assessing clients for counselling. And as a private practitioner, I can tell you that occasionally I get people, I meet them, I make an assessment, and I think they need a different form of support. And this comes up a lot, certainly in my supervision practice, where it's clear sometimes that someone's been taken on and actually they need a different level of support. One of them, of course, is substance misuse. If you get someone who presents with substance misuse issues, it may be that they need support with that first to stabilize them before they can go on to actually look at the emotional kind of issues that are going on. So you've got to be very, very, very careful with private practice and really understand the client groups. In fact, let you into a little secret. I've been qualified for 16 years and I only went into private practice 3 years ago.
Yeah, there you have it. And I know, because I was kind of with you during that process, that it was bumpy in the beginning. And that's with how many years of experience, Rory, because there are challenges that come up and websites that need to be built and tech issues that need to be sorted out. And of course, you can outsource and buy in all of those skills. And again, what we don't want to do here, Rory, is put a negative shadow over private practice. I was in private practice pretty much as soon as I could be ethically, and absolutely loved it. And it was really fulfilling for me and for my clients as well, in terms of the feedback that I got back. And there's just so many considerations. And that's what this discussion is. Have you made those considerations? And one you just touched on there, Rory, is your referral networks. If you're working in an agency, chances are they're all going to be set up for you. And if you have a client and they say, oh, I'm struggling with substance misuse, you can say, well, you can work with them and then go to your line manager within the agency, and they will give you a list of where you can refer in and who you should speak to and what number you should phone to make that referral and what form you should fill in and who that needs to be sent to be able to kind of refer that person. When you're on your own, you've got to put all of that in place. You've got to build your own referral network. And I guess that is one of the good reasons of not finishing your course, stepping out and stepping into private practice, because you've spent the last 3, 4, 5 years of your life studying, not networking and building those referral networks, and not cutting your teeth on the more complex issues that we can sometimes see coming in. And the last thing you want to be doing is catching yourself by surprise when a client comes in and drops something that you don't feel comfortable dealing with. Interesting. It's the considerations, I guess, Rory.
It is, absolutely, Ken. And I wouldn't want to put, as you say, put anybody off private practice. I know a number of people who run successful private practices and they're very happy. Their clients are well serviced and looked after. And it's because the people who run these successful private practices have done the due diligence. They've done all the kind of work that needs to be put in place to support them. So, don't be put off, but be realistic, I think is the message. Well, I tell you what, Ken, this has been an absolutely fab episode. We started off between the difference between counselling and other helping activities. We had a conversation with Kelly Budd from CPCAB around, is level 4 enough for private practice? And we followed that conversation on with what you realistically need to do if you want to go into private practice, the considerations and the things that need to be thought through and put into place. What a fab episode. And as always, hey, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.